Hi! Welcome back! I'm Kris. Thanks for being here. Okay, so this was another request with the other Superpower video, and this is why China will never be a global superpower. So let's find out.
The world is currently in a pitched battle for control between rival superpowers, the United States and China. Is the United States on the decline? Is it truly going to be a Chinese century as China reaches the same level as the United States and potentially surpasses it? The tale of the tape is very different, and surprisingly, China may not be a superpower at all. In some ways, China and the United States do match up pretty competitively. China has a much larger population than the US, almost 4 times as many people. They control a similar amount of land, allowing both to dominate their continent. Both have significant holdings abroad in financial investments, but the US has a global military while China has only one major foreign military outpost in Djibouti. In terms of military strength, China is the only country that is seen as a near peer to the United States. They both have modern intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons. While America has a much larger nuclear arsenal than China, China still retains the ability to strike the US homeland, and unlike Russia's massive Cold War-era arsenal,
they just love their ads, don't they? I can't wait till I can get paid on this. I'm going to put an ad every 30 seconds just on a random video, just to annoy people.
Cold War-era arsenal, these missiles are modern and known to be working, but the definition of a superpower is a specific thing, and China is not there yet. The term superpower was first created in 1944 during the Second World War, and it referred to a state that was dominant and powerful enough to exert influence and project power across the world. When it was first coined, it referred to 3 countries with massive empires or puppet states around the world: the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union. Not only are these states powerful enough to have an impact around the world, but no international action can really be taken without consulting these superpowers first. This made them largely invincible. They only had one weakness: time. This trio of superpowers wouldn't stay that way for long. The United Kingdom saw its mighty empire, which spanned the world at its peak, collapse in the decades after World War II. While the UK is still a powerful nuclear-armed nation, it doesn't have nearly as much power on the world stage as it used to. For a while, the US and the USSR were about as close to global equals as you could get, until the USSR saw its communist government fall, and many of the countries it had conquered split off from its sphere of influence. Its current leader, Vladimir Putin, has no problem acting like Russia is still a superpower, but he learned a harsh lesson when his invasion of Ukraine ground to a halt while the rest of the world threw their money and support toward Ukraine. Russia's also found itself under sanctions and cut off from much of the global economy, showing that today's Russia is nowhere near as influential as the USSR. Then that leaves the United States standing alone, the world's superpower, right? Many have talked about the decline of the US on the world stage, with recent events not helping to inspire confidence that the state will remain the #1 spot. But is that actually impacting its global prestige and influence? Not really. After all, it's still a key member of NATO, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and by far the largest economy in the world. Its military spending is the highest in the world, and its military is state-of-the-art and only getting stronger. If anything, the fear over the US's seemingly instability might be because people see it as an indispensable global cop. Who knows what would happen if its leadership fell into the wrong hands, or if the country became involved in another bloody civil war. And it's not clear if there would be anyone to pick up the slack. China's rise has gained a lot of attention recently, as the Asian nation established itself as a dominant regional power and started making moves outside of Asia. It continues to claim Taiwan as part of its territory, but hasn't made direct moves against the island nation. Its artificial islands in the South China Sea have caused conflict with neighbors like Vietnam, and most of the time China wins these standoffs due to no one else in the region having the military might to challenge its navy. And further away, China's powerful economic sector means it has extensive leverage over other countries, potentially cutting them off from essential supplies if they cross it. And their heavy investments in Africa means that the continent could become a staunch ally in the future. All this put together makes China look like a superpower on the rise, but looks can be deceiving. During the early part of the 21st century, China's rise was the talk of the world, and they certainly acted like they were expanding fast. But since then, a lot of factors have converged to stop the country's rise in its tracks. The first and potentially biggest is a growing population time bomb. While China is still currently the largest country in the world by population, it's expected to lose that title as early as 2023 to India, largely due to China's very low birth rate. This is partially due to China's extended one-child policy, which lasted for decades and led to many couples having only one boy. That left China with a massive gender gap, and many young Chinese men were left without wives, nicknamed bare branches by the media. While the policy has since been rescinded, old habits die hard, and it's rare to see a Chinese family having many kids. As the population ages, that could cause long-term problems. It's not the only ticking time bomb for China's future. China's rise has largely been caused by its economic expansion, something that's become possible when the Chinese Communist Party ended its strict allegiance to Marxism and shifted to a state-run capitalist economy. The country's managed to pick up a lot of the world's manufacturing, particularly of technology, and that's given it a lot of sway. But people are becoming increasingly hesitant to invest in China due to how their products are made, often by prisoners with little to no safety protections. As the internet made it easier for news to spread around the world in an instant, it became harder and harder for China to keep its secrets, and that means China could see its ace in the hole become a pair of twos. Many companies have moved their manufacturing efforts to other countries, with India, South Korea, Vietnam, and Taiwan all becoming major hubs in recent decades. This is particularly the case for Taiwan, which now controls the majority of the world's semiconductor production, and those little devices are the key to making just about every modern computerized device run. This may be a big part of the reason China is interested in conquering Taiwan, but unless it pulls it off in a hurry, odds are the rest of the world will rush to defend Taiwan. Which leads to the other big question: could China actually win such a war? China makes a big show of its military strength, frequently conducting war games off Taiwan and placing its ships in neutral waters. But it primarily projects military strength right now in one way: intimidation. Its ships are modern and powerful, but China's huge military hasn't been fully tested in combat in decades. As one of only a few nuclear powers in Asia, and the one with the largest arsenal, it is the biggest bully in the local playground. But is it the biggest bully in town? The answer is probably not, as the US largely outclasses it in military strength. China might be able to win most local conflicts, but if the US gets drawn into the fray, China's choices would likely be back off or threaten the use of nukes. And that paints a pretty clear picture of who the current superpower is. Of course, China's biggest challenges to its potential superpower status might come from within, not from its rivals. China has frequently been mentioned as a potential second superpower, but as the country modernizes, it might actually be less likely to be a superpower. That's because China's population is increasingly educated.
What a time to cut it off. Cotton socks are terrible. I have cotton socks on right now. I think they're lovely. Back to the video.
China's population is increasingly educated and politically active, and they realize that they live in a country where they haven't had any real say in how the government is run for over 70 years. In the past, protests against the CCP have been put down rather brutally, but the country hasn't seen anything like the massive protests against the COVID-19 lockdowns in its history. These organized protests have become too much even for the usually tough CCP, and that disease might be China's downfall. When COVID-19 first appeared on the scene and turned the world upside down, China acted fast, locking down its cities where the virus appeared and keeping them locked down until cases died down. But while in many countries a lockdown just meant restaurants were closed and there were lines outside of every grocery store, in China they locked down and meant it. It was illegal to leave your home in many places, with lockdowns extending for weeks and even months. The initial lockdowns were deemed a success, and when the virus returned, so did the lockdowns.
Side question: how are the lockdowns for you, wherever you are in your country? For me, so I had went to Gulf Shores, well, Fort Morgan area, Alabama, in February of 2020. I was there for a week. Me and my dogs, they wanted to go. You know, they really wanted me to have time at the beach. And I came back. We worked for a week. And I remember that Friday, the homeowner was going to go grocery shopping. And she came back. She went to Kroger. She came back. She goes, there was a run on toilet paper. I mean, everyone's just freaking out. I don't know what's going on. We're like, I don't know. It's just Corona, you know? And she's just like, I don't know. We went, over the weekend, had our weekend, went back there on Monday and finished that job, and then went somewhere else on Tuesday. And we were near a Clydesdale farm. So I saw a bunch of Clydesdale horses. That was pretty cool. And we got done with that job, and people were being a little precautious. No shaking hands when you went in. You would fist bump people, like, there you go. And we got done with that. We were done at like noon, and my boss calls me about 4:30, and he goes, they're shutting down the store for like a month. I was like, oh, okay. So I spent that month exercising in the morning, just getting back into shape. I was doing 20 different exercises at 1 minute per exercise. So like jump rope for 1 minute, push-ups for 1 minute, crunches for 1 minute, just all kinds of stuff. Running up and down steps for 1 minute. Doesn't seem like much, but oh man, it'll kick your butt. And so that was what I did. And like grocery stores were open, but you could go in there and they limited the amount of people. You had to have a mask on. Kind of went crazy, you know. Like, I understood why they were doing it, but man, you just feel like there's too much going on. Then I remember hearing, going into that grocery store and hearing, yeah, so-and-so was in here yesterday and he's got COVID today. It's just like, oh. So like, then people really started getting scared, like, oh my gosh, it's here. It's in our area. And, man. And I remember being so cooped up that I was just mad. And then I ended up going to Iowa just so I could have a steak. I drove 90 minutes to go to Iowa so I could have a steak. It's great. It's delicious. Yeah. Lockdown here wasn't that bad, and then it just went back to work after a month, and we did a lot of jobs where customers didn't necessarily want us in their house, so they'd be downstairs or upstairs and we'd do the job. We had to wipe down doorknobs and everything with Clorox wipes, and it was crazy.
In 2.5 years into the pandemic, major cities were being locked down under the same stringent rules as 2020, and the people had enough. Currently, the Chinese Communist Party faces the stiffest challenge to its rule it's ever seen, with mass numbers of young protesters showing up, waving blank papers to represent the way the country is silencing them, and to ensure they can't be prosecuted for seditious slogans. The lockdowns have also caused a massive decrease in tourism and investment in China, as outsiders are hesitant to visit when they don't know when it could become impossible to leave for several months due to an outbreak. After all, staying in Shanghai Disneyland sounds like fun until you can't leave, and you're shuffled onto the on-site quarantine camp. Be careful what you wish for, kids. All this has made several past predictions look rather silly. For much of the 21st century, experts were arguing that China's rise was unstoppable and that the country might even surpass the US to become the world's largest economy and most powerful military. Even in the United States, military analysts observed China's dominance over the Indo-Pacific has led them to become a superpower. China certainly views itself as one.
I mean, in respect, you put the videos out, you deserve to get paid, but oh my goodness.
Certainly views itself as one in the way it projects its power in the region, but its only influence outside of its own sphere is only created through economic deals, and if those slow down, China will find itself confined to being a regional power in an area with a lot of fast-rising rivals. Is the high ride really over for China? As far back as 10 years ago, some analysts were saying they believed China would never become a superpower. They pointed to a lot of factors, including China's aging population and increasing dissatisfaction with their government, and they identified one other major problem. China's fast industrialization has left it one of the most polluted countries in the world, with several major cities having hazardous air quality. That could impact the quality of life for its residents as they get older, and combined with a low birth rate, could mean China would see a massive decrease in its working age population within a few decades. Another factor is China's dependence on the global economy. While China has a strong economy based on manufacturing, it needs customers to keep that going, and countries are increasingly hesitant to do business in China. This is due to COVID policies, ethics issues, and the history of China arresting foreign businessmen and journalists. If the bottom falls out of China's trade deals, the country could find itself dealing with a shortage of energy and raw materials, which could cause greater instability in the country and more protests that could eventually put an end to the Chinese Communist Party's rule. And it all might come back to one big question: do people want to move to China? Despite people yelling, "They took our jobs," immigrants are essential to a country's welfare. This is partially due to needing a workforce if the domestic supply of workers isn't enough to replace those leaving the workforce, but it's also the equivalent of a high-powered sports draft. If a genius immigrates to your country and sets up a new business there, it could be a multi-billion-dollar boon. Chinese-American professor Amy Chua argued that China will have a problem attracting immigrants in the future due to other countries having greater incentives. The country's authoritarian tactics and uncertain future might be other roadblocks. And the worst part is, few of these factors are likely to change. For China,
Also, they like to steal your intellectual property. And after a while, from something, and I read it and I don't remember, so don't take what I'm saying here 100%. But like, companies could go there and open up and start working, and then they'll come in, reverse engineer everything that you've done, and then like after a couple years shut you down and boot you out of the country for a number of reasons that they'll just come up with, and then they just integrate your technology that you had that they've taken, and then they open up a corporation that now, think of like Facebook or something like that. They will now open that up, and now it's for China, and it's their version of it for the Chinese. And it was you who came up with the whole concept, and they welcomed you in, reverse engineered your technology, booted you out, and now they're profiting off of it.
China to become a superpower, it would need to keep building on its successes, but the opposite is actually likely to happen. All of China's major problems are like a ball rolling downhill. The population bomb they're facing is a demographic issue that'll take a long time to reverse, if it's even possible to do it. While China's actively trying to boost birth rates now, they're not seeing much success. The same goes for China's problem with attracting talent from outside its borders. Barring a complete overhaul in the government's approach to public affairs, it's likely that immigrants and corporations will be hesitant to invest in the country. The only thing that could change this is a massive overhaul in China's system of government, and if that happens, the future would still look uncertain. Say China's massive student protests continue and eventually bear fruit. Much like in Russia during the 1980s, they got a new leader who takes real movements toward reform. Democracy is introduced and people get a say, and eventually the CCP ends its grip over the country and allows something new to take its place. This is a massive change, and one that will likely turn China's focus inward for the better part of a decade. The CCP's expansionist efforts will go on the back burner, and a China in flux will be less likely to seek military conflict. Foreign investors will likely be waiting to see which way the wind will blow before making heavy investments. The result might be a stronger, more free China that's able to better compete on the global stage, but it'll take a while to get there, and that'll mean China gets further and further away from being a global superpower while the US continues to consolidate its role. So, is the US likely to remain the sole superpower indefinitely? At first glance, it seems likely. After all, China is the closest competitor, and it looks like it's getting further and further away. Russia is increasingly isolated and looking like a cornered animal. The fastest growing country in the world, India, might be a contender, but with its focus still internal, and it has a serious border conflict with its nuclear neighbor Pakistan. While it's likely to evolve into a great power over the coming decades, it's not clear if it even wants to become a superpower. India has so far shown little ambition for expansionism, and in many rural areas it still shows characteristics of a developing nation, like a low literacy rate. But the most likely candidate to be a rival superpower might not be a country at all, exactly. With a population of 446 million, it's only behind China and India. With an area of 1.6 million square miles, it's only behind Russia in area. It's the European Union, the massive political union of 27 member states that covers most of Western Europe and is still growing. While it recently lost Britain as a member state, it has many other countries looking to potentially join. It has a nuclear power amongst its members in France, and all its states have a high Human Development Index indicating high life expectancy and education levels. If Russia's expansion into Ukraine and beyond is foiled, the EU could become the biggest winner, looking like an inviting option for any country worried about being targeted by Russia. Would it eventually be a rival to the United States? The biggest stumbling block might be a lack of a unified foreign policy and a modest military presence. But if its power continues to grow, the member states might eventually move toward greater integration to become a more cohesive unit. And given that most nations in the EU have close relations with the United States, it's possible the two superpowers could become a dominant global alliance. Want to know more about the United Kingdom?
I would say that a strong European Union is just, I would think, is good for the world. Especially because they're all individual countries, yes. They all have their own ideas of who they're working with, but you know, it's just a big conglomerate of countries working together. It also makes it stronger. So, and I don't think the EU would look at the US as an enemy in trade and stuff like that. Sure, you know, in the business aspect, absolutely. You know, you're going to want to take business away from the US, and the US is going to take business away from them. Sure, that comes with the territory. But I don't think it would ever devolve into something like a war. Nah. Okay. Well, that was good. It was interesting. I didn't think they would, because I don't think China has a, what was the term? Is it like deep water? A deep water navy? They're not really capable of taking troops and military stuff and tanks and then like shipping it to South America or something like that. I know that they're not capable of that. I think Russia and China still use trains a lot for a lot of their transportation. I could be wrong on that now, but so anyways, I'm going to end this here. I'm not going to keep talking. Like and subscribe, and until the next video, have a good day, have a good night.